your state will be the host of some of the largest world events in the next few years. And one of the topics which have been the reason for some anxiety is, will we Brazilians be able to meet the goals, the targets, or can we make our dreams come true? What is the message you have for us? What is the reality you see today in terms of safety and security, but also in terms of infrastructure? Well, first of all, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome once again. I hope you are enjoying our beautiful Rio de Janeiro during the very few breaks that you have. It is a pleasure to come back to this discussion panel once again, and I thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with my dear friend, Governor Geraldo Alckmin, and my friend, Minister Fernando Pimentel, former mayor of Belo Horizonte, very important person in our public life in Rio, in Brazil. So first of all, I'd like to say that I agree totally with Governor Alckmin in the actions and the works being done in São Paulo and the way that they have been seeing the topics and the issues. And I'd like to add something which I believe is essential, which is the fact that here in Brazil, in Rio, we decided to break this. Maybe, I don't know, Rio was the beginning of a wrong way of seeing reality, part due to the opinion makers, part due to the media, to the population in general, because Brazil does not have a lot of democratic tradition during its Republican history. Each one of us, in our own lives, are involved against the authoritarian regimes. And fortunately, we won that war. We established a new constitution in the country finally. So since the end of the 70s and beginning of the 80s, in this war against authoritarian regimes and for democratic elections and direct elections in Rio, we had a distortion actually happening. There was a huge confusion in terms of knowing what was public order and human rights, as if there was a dichotomy there, a contradiction between those two things. And that destroyed the public safety apparatus in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So, adding to what Governor Alckmin has said so well, I would like to present this. This is not true. In a modern, contemporaneous point of view, public safety and security is the largest, the biggest of human rights. There's no public policy for social reinsertion and integration, education, health, or urban mobility policies. They do not exist without nothing. Nothing exists without public safety. So this is something that the Brazilian society today needs to acknowledge. And the media acknowledges that today. It doesn't mean brutality. It doesn't mean disrespect to human rights. Quite the opposite. We have been seeing this in Rio. We've seen situations and big achievements, seeing how the police acts and thinks. Now there is commitment towards the safety and security apparatus, as the governor has said. We reduced the rates of violent crimes in Rio, as Governor Alckmin has said, also in São Paulo. He has this tradition of more than 2 decades following this policy. We only began that in 2007, but anyway, we have achieved quite significant figures in terms of improvement. We have lower rates of crime, and with the support of IDG, there is like a pact between the civil and military polices. And twice a year, the regions are assessed, and the police staff is awarded prizes at 3 levels. They receive bonuses, just as the private sector does, based on the rate of achievement of goals. Of course, the rate of homicide is the most important one to be reduced. And robbing vehicles and pickpockets and theft with death, followed by death. And also territories, trying to retake territories. We decided to break with the patience and the tolerance of territories and regions occupied by the parallel sector. They are the pacifier police units, the UPPs. They have collaborated to reducing criminality, but they have originated hope on the other hand, and this is very important. By 2014, this is my commitment, we will have rescued the 20% that's still of the region which is still in the hands of the parallel power. We are now talking to entrepreneurs, businessmen. So this is how the market reacts, be it in the community, but also in the neighboring areas. The valuation of the real estate property, which has reached absurd levels. Anyway, it shows that people are valuing, the business sector is valuing Rio. So first of all, the population of our state. Secondly, the Brazil. And thirdly, the world. We are presenting to everybody that when we retake this new concept of relationship with the government, we established a new partnership with our President Lula. President Lula has been a landmark in terms of change, in terms of presence of Brazil in the world, showing respect towards the population and respect of the great international opinion makers and opinion leaders towards Brazil. It was a challenge. People thought that President Lula would have populistic measures, but rather not. He said his commitment was with the macroeconomic achievements of the Fernando Henrique Cardoso government. So he assured the achievements would be maintained, and he established a government of reinsertion and integration of millions of Brazilians in the productive processes and access to wealth. And that allowed Brazil to make a significant leap. It was the last country to be in the crisis. He was here in this forum 2 years ago, wasn't he? In this hotel, he was saying the very same thing. He was saying that Brazil was going to face the crisis with bravery and boldness, and he did that. And we went through the crisis. And so, in the partnership with the federal government, the most important brand in Brazil, and I'm trying to respect my neighbors, Minas and São Paulo, but Rio has a very important international brand. We have São Paulo here, the first state of our union in terms of GDP, and the third state of the federation is here to my left in participation in the GDP. They're very close to us. Okay, I know. And we know that there was this possibility of winning these events, the best schedule and program for events in the universe. We have it now. The next two events, Rio Plus 20 next year, we expect 50,000 participants, 150 state leaders, then the World Cup, the Cup of the Federations, and the Olympics in 2016, the largest of all the events. And the military games this year, the Cup of the Americas. And last but not least, we will, hopefully in August in Madrid, we will win the Catholic Youth event. And we have a sweet problem, however, in our hands, which is infrastructure. Great achievement, but a big problem because people eat more now in Brazil. They travel more, they purchase more shoes, they consume more, they buy more automobiles. So, undoubtedly, President Lula was quite happy in the choice of his successor. And I always say that in doing so, he showed his commitment and love towards the Brazilian population when he chose this executive lady, a woman who's a very good administrator. So it is up to President Dilma, and she has showed that with her answer in 4 months, her great capacity of accepting challenges. And I'm quite sure, and by the way, in Brazil, we began the forum with the new policy of privatization of the airports, and President Dilma has spoken about this.
After a dramatic period of shortages in terms of the energy sector, she takes office, and she has shown, and during her office as Minister of Energy, she had the ability of understanding the process of energy demand in Brazil, which partners and stakeholders were important and how they were acting in each one of the sectors, alternative industries, the most important industry, what is the role of the state, the role of the private sector, how to reduce costs, how to deal with bottlenecks. I'm sure that we will meet these challenges with a support from the state, with all municipalities participating, especially with the federal government. We shall overcome, and we shall overcome every obstacle. Thank you very much, Mr. Governor. Minister Fernando Pimentel, you as a professor of economy responsible today for 3 important topics: development, industry, and foreign trade. The topics that I wish you to tackle would be more in the sense of having your understanding. Well, the first one was actually tackled by Governor, the issue regarding energy. Brazil is growing. Brazil needs more energy, more power. The prices are going up. The second topic that is also concerning is the issue regarding inflation. Inflation already around 6%, with a certain bias to grow. And the third and not less complex topic would be the topic of the supervaluation of our currency, which happens due to the frailty of other economies. You, in your privileged position as Ministers of Industry, Development, and Foreign Trade, what is your understanding? What are your proposals with regards to these 3 major topics? Well, first of all, I would like to greet the audience. Good afternoon. Say it is a pleasure to be here, and to compliment also Jacques Markovich and Governor Alckmin, and the wonderful work you have been doing in São Paulo already on your 2nd term in office. My dearest friend, Governor Cabral, he's a dear friend. I've been your fan for many years. And before I actually tackle these 3 topics, which I was presented with, he says I have a privileged position. I said, no, I have no privilege in being in this ministry that has to deal with these very tough subjects. I would like to briefly talk about the brilliant presentations by Governor Alckmin and Governor Cabral regarding the security topic, especially in the case of Governor Cabral, also going through the whole idea of the challenges we have ahead of us. I believe, and this is the audience that might be the most appropriate to deal with this. I believe that we have here a beautiful example of what is happening in Brazil. Actually, what has been happening in Brazil. We in Brazil are going through a very positive and extraordinary positive moment. It's an important momentum for our country. And this is probably due to the fact that there is a unusual a notable convergence of opinions of Brazilian politicians, of the Brazilian entrepreneurs, of those that are opinion makers, of all the leaderships in the different levels, unions, labor, communities, everyone thinking together and thinking about the greater good, a larger project. Brazil is now building a new national project, and there is, of course, great convergence. We have here different men from different parties. However, they have the same opinion, the same diagnosis, the same analysis, and they work together to deal with an important topic, which is security. There's no attempt of bringing the outcomes to their own parties. What there is an understanding. Difficulties, we know they exist. Municipalities, states, and the federal government have difficulties, but the governments are elected to solve problems, not to create problems. And this is what the Brazilian people understand and have been understanding ever since we reinstall democracy in our country. The Brazilian people have taught us how to follow this path. Governors are elected to solve the problems, not to make life worse. What has been done in these last few years is exactly trying to understand this and transforming this in an important convergence of ideas in Brazil. That is why there is a certain continuity of good practices. We change the parties, the governments, but the good public policies are maintained. The achievements that Brazil had and Rio had in security, in São Paulo also, in the state of Minas, my state, are due to that, to this convergence of ideas. And this is something that we should be very proud of, we as Brazilians, and also for those that are executives that come from other countries. Brazil is living through a very important moment in its history. We have found our path, we have found our project, and we will continue to build this project regardless of the changes, party changes, government changes that might happen, and thanks to the healthy democratic rules. Now, finally, let us tackle the three topics proposed. Well, energy is, of course, essential to all of us, of course, around the world, because we are, and as Jacques said in the beginning when he mentioned Japan, as a sign of the risks that exist today. A good part of the world depends on atomic energy. Europe, especially, the US also to a certain extent. However, we do not depend. We are a privileged country. 80% of our energy is hydropower, renewable energy, and clean energy. However, we have a problem. Our energy is just too expensive, too expensive. I would say that it's probably one of the most expensive sources of energy in the world, if not the most expensive. And this, which probably wasn't a problem in the past, but added to the real's valuation, our currency's valuation, a certain loss of competitiveness in our industry, this is finally becoming a serious problem and an obstacle to a good future. It won't be easily solved. The cost of energy, in the Brazilian case, good part of this cost has to do with taxation. It's probably approximately half of it, federal and state taxing. And we cannot take this lightly. We cannot believe that it's just a matter of reducing taxes on energy that the problem will be solved. This will actually bring about an even more serious problem in terms of state finance. This has to be very well agreed and negotiated with the states. It will be a serious issue also for the federal government. So therefore, we have a tough calculation to make. But to our benefit, President Rousseff understands this very well. She understands energy more than any one of us. And she's also focusing on this topic, really thinking about this. And very shortly, we will probably prepare, design a new way out to this stalemate. This will certainly involve the private sector, the state heads of states, and the governors. There is, of course, some red signs already coming up in the Ministry of Energy, so that we can at least solve the first important challenge presented by Jacques. Jacques also mentioned inflation. This is yet another topic that is extremely concerning for all of us. As you know, in Brazil is one of the countries that has best left behind the inflation periods during the 80s until the beginning of the 90s. We were capable, through a brilliance in creative solutions, which was the Real plan to stabilize our currency. And then after important fiscal sacrifices and tax reform, and of course, I was, during the Real plan, I was the opposition. Therefore, I can give my opinion that without that effort made during the 8 years of Governor Fernando Henrique Cardoso, we would not have achieved the currency stability we have today. Therefore, we have to state that it is important to have this continuity of good practices, the maintenance of macroeconomic basis and fundamentals that today are also followed through with President Dilma and with former President Lula da Silva. This is one of the most relevant issues in terms of overcoming the crisis. So now we are faced with a new challenge, a inflation surge. Certainly it's an exogenous shock because it has to do with commodity prices. There are some internal components, however, these are lesser events. However, this is being faced with great determination by the government. Today, in the morning, our Treasury was announcing the first results for the first quarter of 2011, and the primary surplus results are extremely positive. There was an important expense cut and also an increase in collection and tax collection with results above the target that were proposed. In the up-to-dated, in these past 4 months, we have a surplus higher than the previous year. So therefore there is a relevant effort on the side of the federal government. And President Dilma has already increased interest rates. I am not in favor of increase of interest rates unless it's absolutely necessary, but she has raised in 1.25% interest rates with a higher bias if the inflation situation is not solved. Therefore, I wish to understand and believe that we're taking the right measures with courage, understanding, and knowledge of all those that are involved in the economic process, especially the private sector, which doesn't like high interest. But we know that for the time being, we have to have a more orthodox approach necessary for the country to not be scared by the ghost of inflation, which pursued us for many years, especially for the low-income population. And finally, to conclude, let's talk about the most difficult topic, which is exchange, or the ratio or the difference between the Brazilian and the American currencies. The roots of inflation are the same as the exchange problems. In the world, we have a paradox situation. Developed countries, wealthy countries, so to speak, have not yet left the economic crisis behind. They have low growth rate, high unemployment, fiscal deficits, a high fiscal imbalance, and therefore they're still practicing expansionist practices on purpose in order to recover the competitiveness they have lost some years ago. On the other hand, emerging countries, and maybe Brazil is one of the best examples, present a situation that is extremely healthy. We have left the crisis behind. We have come back to our growth rates. We're almost to full employment, serious and consistent fiscal policy. However, we are threatened by an inflation surge, which will bring excess liquidity due to the monetary expansionism, especially in the U.S. Therefore, this means that in confronting inflation as we are, we continue hindering our exchange rate policies or exchange rate. But this is a choice we had to make. Now it's a matter of facing inflation. We will still suffer with it a little. We'll still face problems with exchange, which certainly does not help our domestic industries. And I see this on a daily basis in my ministry. This will not support our export efforts. And we have to offset this with greater competitiveness, with all the different sectors that we can introduce in the area. So we do all we can so that our industry, our productive sector, won't be weakened by the exchange rate that we do not wish to have. But we'll also recover from this. This will be the year in which Brazil will show it is committed with currency stability, it is committed with macroeconomic fundamentals, and it will continue to grow. It will win the inflation crisis, and it will just go back to its competitiveness, even with this difference in exchange rates. And with this convergence of well-intentioned politicians and policymakers around the main objectives the country wishes to achieve, I'm sure that we're going to get there. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Fernando Pimentel. Cabral, you have talked about infrastructure, and in the debates we had here during our forum, Frederico Murad, president of Embraer, one of Corado, one of the voices about this logistics, said in one of the observations that it takes longer to get environmental license than to build a plant. Belo Monte would be an example. There are many other examples. And we will try to put this discussion into our agenda. How do you bring together development and environmental protection? What is your understanding of the actions that should be undertaken in order to reconcile development and environment? As promising as it can be. Churchill used to say that democracy is a lot of work, but we haven't yet invented anything better. If we think about the BRIC countries, certainly Brazil, of the emerging countries, is the country with the greatest commitment with democracy and a free society. Then we have the Justice Department, we have the magistrate, we have environmental authorities, we have NGOs, we have the media, we have civil society, and a free media. Of course, it's a lot of work, but we have all these elements, thank God. And we have dealt with this with the improvement of our civil servants in the environment area. Carlos Minky was minister in Lula's first term in office. Isabela Teixeira was my subsecretary for the environment, and she's currently the minister of the environment for President Dilma. Therefore, we have a qualified team. We have done many tenders and exams to qualify this team. They are definitely radical in terms of environmental commitment, but with an enormous understanding of economic development. Therefore, this combination will sometimes say no to some investments that make no sense in environmental terms, and yes to some, and yes to others that do not have any kind of environmental impact. This process happens as a benchmark for Brazil. Here in Rio, we had 3 environmental entities here in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. We had the National Forestation Institute, we had the CERLA, which dealt with waters and rivers, and we had FEMA, which was the entity that would deal with environment in general. So we brought these 3 entities together, the IMEA, Institute of the Environment. We have empowered these institutes to deal with issues that were in our hands, and we outsourced it to them. We have a portfolio of investments in Rio de Janeiro for the next 4 years, according to the Federation of Industries, of around $102 billion in terms of oil and gas, steel, petrochemical, infrastructure in airports, ports, highways, roads, services. Therefore, we concentrate major projects and impacting projects. Everything is going well in our government. Sometimes there's a municipal authority. The other day I was visiting a strategic construction site, which is the highway, and I saw that there were frogs that were procreating. And these frogs were procreating, and President Lula was right. The frogs were actually procreating. They were mating. So this highway is a highway that has almost 75 kilometers of virgin lands going through. It goes through the end of the Guanabara Bay. It's absolutely essential for our state. It's a ring, a highway, which will go from Itaguaí, the region of Seropédica, Nova Iguaçu, Duque de Caxias, and it is an important construction for a state. And because we couldn't go forward because frogs were mating. So we had to develop a bridge so that the frogs could continue their business, because it was an order from a federal institution. So let's preserve the frogs and build a bridge. Let's go to our before last question. I will address this question to Governor Alckmin. Governor, you were in Congress. You were one of the authors, or maybe the author, behind the consumer protection laws. It's already part of the Brazilian history. And during this last presidential elections, the topic regarding reforms, political, tax reform, Social Security reform, were raised and were raised. Therefore, what is your understanding? We are now, have been for like 4 months of this new government. We know that the reforms should take place when you have a solid support from civil society, because certain interests might be questioned or challenged. So what do you think would be the priorities? Jacques Markovich, allow me, before I deal with the reforms, I would like to greet the initiative of the federal government with regards to the airport initiative, with regards to the concessions and the partnerships, the public-private partnerships. We see that democracy is not just a matter of electing, it's a matter of participating. In the modern world, it is important to have the participation of the private sector with regards to investments, infrastructure, and logistics, and of civil society, organized civil society, of non-governmental organizations in terms of providing public services. In our experience, I have 12 years experience in São Paulo, 13 years actually, with highway concessions. We developed Imigrantes, the second part of Imigrantes Highway, in 30 months, between the beginning of the construction until the end. And we were certified by ISO 14001, which is the one that deals with the environment. So, in the private initiative, be it through the concession model or through a public-private partnership, this will represent an important gain for a country. And in the providing civil service, the contracts under management rules, we have 28 hospitals and not one single civil servant. All of them are part of our National Health System, SUS. But the hospital is public, but it doesn't have to be managed by the state. The management can be done on a private basis. With regards to the reforms, I'm very optimistic. I believe Brazil is the reality and the promise of the future. We are going through an excellent moment with a demographic bonus. The country doesn't have now so many children. Birth rates, that was 5.7 and now lower. We are not yet an elderly country. We are a mature country. Therefore, we have an important window of opportunities with a maximum labor force economically active. So it's an excellent moment. But this should not withdraw the importance of actually going through with structuring reforms. Brazil cannot remain an expensive country, and in being so, lose competitiveness in a globalized economy.
Tributária, que não.
So I would talk about the tax reform, which is not easy, but should be done step by step, slowly. This, and particularly one item, which is unburdening the payrolls, because we are vice champions in the world in charges. Everything is on the payroll, even things that have nothing to do with the payroll. You contracted, you registered somebody, then you send money to the INCRA, which is the land reform, to the education budget. Everything is up on the payroll. So unburdening the payroll taxation would reduce illegality, and informality would motivate and stimulate more employment. So I would do the tax reform step by step. We also are living a tax war, a new and more severe law, which is the war of imported. Import, and then you want to pay tax. And they call it pro-employment. No, it's pro-employment for the Chinese, not for the Brazilians. That is why I'm totally in favor of the resolution by the Federal Senate, Resolution 72, which says the quota rates for imported goods which are not industrialized in the state should have 4% paid tax charge, but you can't just say it's 0%. Otherwise, you are working against the national industry, against employment. So the tax reform is very important. I am a great advocate of decentralization because Brazil is a continental country, and it has two features. Two things are happening. One is that which we're living now. What characterizes federation is the cooperation between states of the federation. State and the union need to cooperate because responsibilities are not separate. Who's responsible for health? Everybody. The same happens with municipalities. So the characteristic number one of a federation is cooperation between the entities of that federation. So the tax reform should be decentralized. And I was happy to see that in the issue of airports, you can transfer that to states and municipalities because we are closer, we can be faster, we can be more agile. So decentralization is always positive, as well as a public reform. And I would talk about two things: a district vote or mixed district vote. In the US, the mandate is 2 years and nobody says anything. Why? Because it's very close. The neighbor will be inspecting on you. If you have a district vote, the campaigns are cheap. If you're not in the media, how can you fight in the elections on the same level? So it stimulates cooperativism and class associations, and also to prohibit coalitions. People were saying that France was difficult because there are different types of cheese and too many political parties. I was a representative when Montoro was a governor. We had 84 seats in the assembly, and PMDB, Montoro's, our party at the time, elected 42 of those seats. So 84 seats, we had 42. Montoro had 36% of the votes. In the last election, I had more than 50% of the votes, and my party elected 22 of 94 seats. So there are 16 different parties in the assembly. Parties which have only one representative, only two representatives, and when it's two, one does not follow the other. They fight against each other. So you should prohibit proportional coalitions, and in doing that, you are helping Brazilian democracy. You cannot have 40 political parties in one country. It's fragmentation. So I would like to say that the tax reform might help the economy by simplifying our tax model, making it more simple. On the other day, Sergio Cabral, 2006, when I was a candidate for presidency, I came to Angra dos Reis, and on the way to Rio, I was flying over a mansion, a Hollywood-style mansion, and I asked the pilot, who's the lucky guy? A banker? No, he's a tax attorney. So this is the haven, the paradise for tax attorneys. So a tax reform without many things. By prohibiting proportional coalitions, you reduce the number of political parties and you have an advance with district votes. Well, we have the very last minutes of this discussion, which is very positive and very inspiring. And let us close with a question from the audience. But this question is going to be asked by a young man, 22-year-old young man who will be 32 years old in 2020, and he will remember what was said today. He might be a president then. We're 10 years away from 2020, so we'll have an advance in democratic consolidation. Can you identify yourself, please, and then ask your question? Young man, use the microphone, please. Where is he? Where's this young man? There he is. Say your name, please, and ask your question. This is going to be the question that one of our guests, each one of our guests will have to answer. I'm Mateus. I'm representing the Global Changemakers from the British Council. And my question is, considering the context of economic growth of Brazil in the next decade and the huge presence of young people in Brazil, what are the concrete measures to generate a positive environment so that people can build their own businesses, generate employment, and be important players in the future development of Brazil? Yes, about entrepreneurship. Pimentel, Cabral, and Alckmin, 1 minute each. Well, first of all, Mateus, education, of course. A huge offer of educational services. This must be provided so that the youth can choose its way. We have just launched the TECH program, a federal program with the support of states and municipalities, strengthening professional training and technical training in Brazil. More than 200 technical schools will be built in the next 4 years. This is the first thing. Without the educational tool today, we cannot break barriers. And something which has already been said, motivating and stimulating entrepreneurship. We have established 1 million independent entrepreneurs already. The individual entrepreneur is a program by which the business person enrolls, and they pay very low rates and low taxes. This is for up to 36,000 reais revenue a year. We will expand that to 50,000 reais. This is to open a small business, and then from this point onwards, your courage, your boldness, and your efforts will make you be a good businessman or not. The future is yours, and in Brazil, that has begun. Okay, closing because I only have 1 minute. Well, I totally agree with Minister Pimentel. Education and support to small businesses, reducing tariffs and taxes, providing credit, is all very important. Today, we could see two signs. On one hand, we don't have enough jobs, and then you come home with your pocket full of little papers. My husband, my wife is unemployed. And on the other hand, we have places, open places. So we need to match those two things. There are places available, but we need training. So we have 270,000 technical students in the state. And the bonus, and what is the salary of professors? Employability is how they earn bonuses. What's the percentage of students that have graduated from that school that have been employed? So 94% in ITECs, because you focus on regional economy usually in these ITECs, in the technical schools. But also if you look at unemployment, you see that it is in the low educational levels. So when you do a technical school or a FATEC, a 3-year university college, the low educational level people will not come in because they are not trained enough. So I'm establishing 180-hour courses for pizza makers, chefs, civil construction people. And when they come to do that, we offer the ASIA, the school also for youth and adults. We say, well, you cannot graduate at 9th elementary school and high school. Well, come to this school and do it quickly, because we need to improve the educational level of our people so as to improve their employability. On the other hand, we need to value the entrepreneur spirit in Brazil. We need to challenge that and motivate them. Paul VI would say that development is the new name of peace. There's no true peace without opportunity. So stimulating entrepreneurship, yes. Governor Sergio Cabral, you have the final word, and you will be closing this panel, addressing this topic, but also making our final conclusions. And before that, I would like to thank you for the hospitality, for welcoming us so generously into our state. So I would like, on behalf of the organizers, and would like to tell that we understand President Dilma's inability to come here. I'm quite sure, however, that the participants of this event have seen in the Brazilian leaders from 3 different Brazilian states, 2 governors and 1 minister of state. They are reflecting the inspiration and the knowledge much more than the concrete action. the way in which Brazilian leaders are thinking Brazil is an important inspiration. And having said that, I would like to ask Governor Sergio Cabral to talk about entrepreneurship and his understanding of the question that has been asked, and then conclude the meeting. Well, here in Brazil, during carnival days and the parties and the ballrooms of clubs, we close by hearing the hymn of the city of Rio, Cidade Maravilhosa. It's a tradition here. I'm not going to sing that song, the anthem of our city, but I'm going to say we're sitting here as if in a puzzle, we are complementing each other. And I see now that Pimentel's from the Labour Party, I'm from PMDB, Alckmin from PSDB, the three largest political parties in Brazil, but we have very similar points of view, I would say, regarding important issues in the country. So I was talking to Governor Alckmin here when he was talking about political reform. I was saying, I agree with you in terms of political and tax reform, but you have to talk about optional vote, optional election. No civilized country in the world has mandatory voting, and in Brazil, it is mandatory still. So we are complementing each other. This program for quick training of people is very important. We have a gap of youth from 15 to 17, and then adults about 45 years of age with very low educational levels, and they end up doing general works. So we need to train them. Sometimes they graduate but have no skill, and they do general types of job. So the experience we have is CVT. It is a federal program which is applied here in Rio, and the rate of employability is extraordinary. It is like Governor Alckmin has said, the Ministry of Science and Technology together with the Secretary of Science and Technology, and then depending on the regional need, we will train people from the gas and chemical area, in the area of polymers, until the training of hairdressers, mechanics, and chefs. And it is a great success. We're opening, and the training of postgraduate studies, research centers, university level, elementary and high schools, but professional technical schools is a great challenge in Brazil. Well, on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank you all for being here, our guests, Governors Alckmin and Cabral, Minister Pimentel, and I would like you to give them a hand of applause for the ideas that they have presented here.